Hello everyone, this is Jonathan Little for PokerNews.com. Today we're going to be reviewing a hand I played at last year's World Series of Poker. It is quickly approaching this year, so I'm going to be reviewing a few hands over the next couple of weeks from my World Series of Poker last year. So this hand is from a $1,500 buy-in event, and as you can see I get Ace King of Clubs in the big blind. Pretty great hand. A player under the gun makes it 550. Tight aggressive kid, not crazy or anything, just certainly tight enough. And when facing an early position raiser, I'm very inclined to just call from pretty much any position, especially out of position, with my whole range. And that sometimes means just calling with pocket aces, sometimes just calling with pocket kings, with pocket jacks, etc. And we're doing this because the initial raiser under the gun should be incredibly strong, such that if I do re-raise, it's very difficult to exploit the opponent by being aggressive. So if I am re-raising, it pretty much has to be with a premium hand. And if it has to be with a premium hand, then my opponent should be able to play very well with whatever he has. And also, he should just have a good hand most of the time. I mean, if the guy's raising under the gun, maybe with pocket sevens or higher, pocket sixes or higher, something like that, ace king, ace queen, maybe king queen, maybe ace jack suited. If that's his range, it's pretty hard to exploit that range just because it is so incredibly strong. So I think the best play in this scenario is to call with pretty much everything. The one big exception to that is whenever you have a hand like pocket aces and you are very convinced the initial guy under the gun has a very tight range and he will never fold. Like, he's just going to blindly put a stack in with his pocket tens and you're going to stack him. Against those players, you certainly do want to be 3-betting aces and kings. But against most good players, I like calling. Also, if your opponent is opening with a lot of hands under the gun, you want to make it to where your range is underrepresented and you want to keep them in with their trash. If the guy is raising ace 3 suited under the gun or 8-5 suited under the gun, if he really is getting after it, you don't really care if he stays in, especially if he's going to be trying to represent a strong hand or a strong range. So anyway, we flop top pair, top kicker. That's great. My typical plan here is to check call. I think if we check raise, our opponent's going to fold out most hands worse than king queen. I mean, king jack if he has it. Most people aren't raising king jack under the gun. Most tight aggressive kids aren't. So I think the only real way to get a lot of value out of this hand is to check call. I really don't want to let the opponents fold their pocket queens. And if we do something like lead the flop and then lead the turn, or even check raise the flop, we're going to get our opponent to fold a lot of the time. And we don't really want our opponent to fold. So we're just going to check, and we're going to check call. Playing out of position is pretty dicey. It's hard to get a lot of value. And this is sort of what happens when you play out of position, which is why you typically don't want to be there. Turn gives us a backdoor flush draw, which is fantastic. I guess it's worth mentioning, we're not so worried about the flush draws from our opponent. Again, if he's raising under the gun, he's probably going to have ace queen of hearts, ace jack of hearts, then maybe queen jack of hearts, jack 10, and 10-9 of hearts. Besides that, he really should not have very many hearts. And of course, now we would love for a club to come on the river, so we're obviously not worried about those. So this is a spot where we're probably just going to continue check calling. Kind of a similar scenario on the flop, whereas if I check raise, what is the guy really going to call with, right? If I check raise, he's going to call with king queen, pocket aces. He's probably going to fold ace queen. He's probably going to fold queen jack. He's probably going to fold king jack. So if I do check raise and he calls, I have to assume I'm drawing, which is not really what you want when you have this hand. So this is, again, another spot where against a tight under the gun range, you're probably much better off just check calling and trying to get to the showdown. River is a jack of hearts. It's not a particularly good river. I check. And if it checks through, I expect to win a lot of the time. But this time, my opponent bets half pot. So let's think about our opponent's range. He raised pre-flop, continuation bet the flop, continuation bet the turn, and is now betting the river. I think in this scenario, the worst hand our opponent's going to have for value would be ace-king, and he may not even bet ace-king for value. Just because king-queen gets there, king-jack gets there, and those hands are never folding. Would this guy ever bet a hand like ace-queen on the turn? Maybe not. So I'm having a hard time coming up with very many bluffs that our opponent could have. He could have pocket tens, but again, a lot of people just don't even bet the flop with that. They just check through the flop, or they don't bet the turn, they just check through the turn. So it's very difficult to come up with a range of hands that we are happy against in this scenario. If I got the vibe that my opponent would check behind the flop with pocket queens, That would probably make me a little bit more inclined to call the river because now we're not so worried about those. But this is a pretty nasty spot. I certainly would not fault myself for folding here. Again, we're not really so worried about the hearts, but the thing is that like what bluffs should our opponent have in his range unless he's crazy? And this was a tight aggressive kid. He was not crazy. So against his under the gun raising range, I think we actually need to fold. I don't like folding. We should make that clear that folding's no fun. But this is a scenario where I think folding's probably the best play. Let's see if I pay him off. Somehow I don't pay him off. It's a miracle. I have no clue what he had, but this hand certainly did not play out well. So a lot of people look at this and think, oh man, I had a pair and a flush draw. I should have tried to win this pot by check raising the turn. But I'm pretty sure, given that he raised under the gun and then went bet, 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 if we check raise the turn, we probably would have ended up in a pretty bad spot. I do think we are getting bluffed off bluffed off a chop a reasonable amount of the time. But even then, we're going to be against king, queen, or king, jack, or pocket queens, or maybe even pocket eights a lot of the time. And like I said, if the opponent's just going to be betting with everything, we should probably find a call here. But this guy was a tight, aggressive kid. Whenever your opponent's played tight for a while, Andy opens under the gun, Andy bets 3 times, it's okay to make a snug fold. And this is an example of that. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you're going out to the World Series and you see me, definitely say hello. I'd love to meet you. And be sure to check back next week. Also, check out my personal site, jonathanlittlepoker.com. There I have a weekly blog post and also a podcast, Weekly Poker Hand. If you like this type of video, you will love the podcast. There are a lot of episodes of it. So be sure to check it out on jonathanlittlepoker.com. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll be back next week.